It sprang from the promise of nature's cure, offering a respite for the weary and hope to the infirm. It grew through the vision of an extraordinary man who created a diversion for the wealthy and a meeting place for the powerful. During its decline, businessmen and pleasure seekers shared its fading splendor. But after decades of uncertainty and neglect, once again its grandeur emerges.
People came to our valley because of our mineral water. They were seeking something for their health, for relaxation, and for refreshment. And the mineral water was a big attraction.
The first hotel here dates to about 1845, called the French Lick House, or sometimes the Hotel Windsor. The land had actually been acquired several years earlier from the state of Indiana by Thomas Bowles, who in turn gave it to his son, Dr. William Bowles, who was a physician at Paoli. He began developing the site and put a hotel here, and by 1851 was actually advertising the spring waters.
It was named by a Dr. Rogers in 1869. He came and analyzed the water and was so impressed with the wealth of minerals coming from deep in the earth that he dubbed it Pluto's well.
Pluto was actually a Roman god. He was the Roman god of the underworld, and of course the springs came from underground, hence the name Pluto.
In 1888, new owners, a syndicate from Louisville, added another building. The new building was called the Clifton. They made improvements on the original building and called it the Windsor. Prior to the coming of the railroad to French Lick, the hotel was only open in the summer. But in 1889, the Monon Company, the Indiana line, put a rail line right to French Lick. And then people could come here from any place that had a train station. In 1897, the original building burned, what would then be known as the Windsor. The owners had very good insurance and they rebuilt immediately a little more elegant three-story wood frame building. Tom Taggart bought these three buildings.
Legends begin with legendary people, and I think that Thomas Taggart Sr. was one of those legendary people of his time.
Tom Taggart, at the age of 15, was told by his father to quit school and go to work because he was never going to amount to anything.
Mr. Taggart became the manager of the restaurant at the railroad station in Xenia, Ohio when he was 20, and was then transferred to manage the Union Station restaurant at Indianapolis. He became very popular with especially the Democrats and held several offices, including auditor of Marion County. And then in the 1890s, he became the mayor of Indianapolis.
He continued to improve upon his business skills, later purchasing the Grand Hotel in Indianapolis, and came to French Lick actually as a guest for the first time. Saw great potential here and ended up forming a group that bought the hotel in 1901.
It only took him 4 years to buy out his partners so that he could be the top guy in charge of it all.
French Lick Springs is Thomas Taggart. I mean, it's his story.
The building we see today is the Taggart Building.
When Taggart's group purchased the hotel in 1901, it immediately began a program of rebuilding and improvement. Within a year, the old hotel had been enlarged and faced with the signature French Lick Springs yellow brick. In 1905, Taggart, now the sole owner, constructed an annex running south from the main building. By 1908, a two-story recreation center and spa had been added. Between 1910 and 1911, a six-story, fireproof addition was constructed running west. 3 years later, the deluxe wing was added. The hotel had become the equal of any resort in the country. In 1924, construction began on a new 200-foot, 6-story convention hall running directly north of the old hotel. Within a year, the French Lick Springs Hotel had evolved into the structure we know today.
Because of Mr. Tom Taggart's political connections, the hotel was the unofficial headquarters for the Democratic Party.
He became chairman of the Democratic National Committee in 1904 and actually held the spot for 10 years and was very well respected. And of course, if you were a Democrat and you were anybody, you came to French Lick to see Thomas Taggart.
In 1931, we had a Democratic Governors Conference at our hotel. And it was at that conference that it was decided that the governor of New York, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, would run for president for the first time.
Governor Pinchot, you were the first inspiration that I ever had on the subject of forestry.
Tom Taggart knew that the power broker people out there that would visit his hotel would travel there in their own private train cars. He did some dealing to see that the Monon was a direct route to the hotel, and of course the Monon connected directly from Chicago, from Louisville, from St. Louis, and all points west.
Oh, up and down the Monon, everything is fine, 'cause that rootin' tootin' Monon, she's a Hoosier line. Oh, up and down the Monon, everything is fine, 'cause that rootin' tootin' Monon, she's a Hoosier line. All aboard, all aboard, it's my Indiana home that I'm a-heading toward.
The heyday of the hotel would be the late teens and the 1920s before the stock market crash.
Back in those days, getting away for a vacation meant going and staying as much as a week, 2 weeks, sometimes a month at one location. It was really a getaway destination.
The average stay at the hotel would be at least 10 days so that you could participate in the health regimen. Every guest, when they would open their door in the morning from their room, would find Pluto water in jugs or bottles.
The water of the hotel actually built that hotel. During Dr. Bowles' time even, the money coming in from the sale of the water actually exceeded the receipts coming in from guests. And certainly Mr. Taggart understood that principle too.
There are 22 minerals in the water, minerals that are part of our bodies, things that we need, and primarily sulfur. Sulfur is an antibiotic. So before antibiotics were even thought of, this was being used as an antibiotic.
In essence, when you think about what the waters did, it was simply a laxative, and the term mild and gentle did not apply to this laxative.
The slogan for our Pluto water was, "When nature won't, Pluto will."
Well, there were two things that you had to do if you wanted to be cured. One of them, of course, was to drink a lot of the water. The other was to get a lot of exercise.
Hoosier time, Hoosier time, there never ever was a better time. Hoosier time, where every golden moment is a time for joy and laughter. Hoosier time, Hoosier time, is the best time of all.
If a guest desired to participate in an activity, you could find it somewhere here on these grounds.
Tom Taggart inherited a casino, but he really didn't want one.
Gambling here in Indiana in the early 1900s was never legal, but it did go on in the towns of French Lick and West Baden.
Al Brown ran a casino in the actual resort early on, and then when Mr. Taggart took over, he pretty much evicted Al Brown from the resort.
And that Mr. Brown simply went across the street from the hotel and built a big, beautiful casino.
And he built it out of the very same brick as the hotel, so by all appearances, it was part of the hotel, and everybody assumed it was part of the hotel.
By the 19-teens, 1920s, there were as many as 17 casinos operating here in the valley.
Although Mr. Taggart may not have operated a casino on the hotel grounds, he certainly benefited financially from the visitors that gambling attracted. Most likely, the Taggart family's political influence enabled illegal gambling to endure in the valley until 1949.
This is where people came to gamble. This could have been Las Vegas. This was Vegas before Vegas existed.
By far, Derby Week was the week at the hotel. It was booked with people who would be going to the Derby, and you would see all those wonderful hats and all of the dress of the day.
Fashion runs ahead of the horses. Styles designed in advance for the spectators of the coming race at Churchill Downs. All this is taking place at the French Lick Springs Hotel, Indiana. This one is called Man o' War, a cape costume for sport with a metal horse's bit at the neck. At the left is the winner framed with a white floral horseshoe. The hat, well, jockey to you. Off to the races in clothes that will win.
People would come with their private train cars to stay here and then go to the Derby rather than fight the crowds in Louisville. And then they would stay until time to go to Indianapolis to the Indy 500.
Tom Taggart almost negotiated getting the Indianapolis 500 track built at French Lick, but they could not find any level ground big enough in that entire valley to build a racetrack.
It was kind of the social event of the season, and May was a big month for the hotel because of those events.
The waiters' race was a very elaborate, wonderful tradition of the hotel that went on for decades and decades and decades, and people loved it. The waiters loved doing it. It was a part of the fabric and the history of the hotel. But as people became sensitized to the way African Americans were treated and portrayed, that ended at the hotel.
When Mr. Taggart bought this property in 1901, there was a 9-hole golf course here. It wasn't much of a course, but golf wasn't much of a game at that time. 1917, Mr. Taggart bought about 300 acres of land a couple of miles from the hotel, and he hired Donald Ross to design us a championship golf course. That was completed in 1920. We had our first PGA tournament in 1924, and of course that was won by Walter Hagen.
Thomas Taggart wanted to ensure the future of French Lick, and prior to his death in 1929, he'd made arrangements to divide the shares of the hotel amongst his children, giving the controlling interest to his son Thomas. Thomas Jr., so to speak, although he wasn't really a junior, continued to operate the hotel just as his father had done for the next 20 years.
During the Depression, the French Lick Hotel did not close. I think the reason we were able to stay open was partly because of our mineral water. We were still making money with that.
Because of the political stature of the Taggarts, there was an awful lot still of conventions coming into the French Lick Resort, even during the Depression era.
Tom Taggart, you've got one of the greatest resting places in the world. I've been here now just one day, and I feel as rested as if I'd slept a month.
Thank you, Governor.
World War II certainly was an era of patriotism, and therefore the Taggarts jumped right on board with that because they were true patriots.
War bond drives were a big thing then, and a very successful one was held here at the hotel. They actually raised over $2 million for the war effort with the help of some notable celebrities. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. They said they even auctioned off their clothes to raise funds for the war bond drive.
Many movie stars have stayed here. Lana Turner, Bing Crosby, Bob Hope, Irving Berlin.
Talked with a gentleman once who grew up here in the area, and he said as a boy he lived near the airport, and they would hear the planes come in, and he would run down to the airport to see who it was. One time he did that, and it was Howard Hughes and Lana Turner, and it was his practice to offer to carry the luggage of these distinguished guests, only this time Howard and Lana didn't have any luggage.
We've had many of the political celebrities, Harry S. Truman, of course.
It's my deep honor, my friends of Indiana, to present to you the champion of all the people, America's Harry S. Truman.
But you know, there's nothing in the world that I appreciate more than a friendly, democratic meeting.
Tom Taggart sold the hotel in 1946, and eventually the Sheraton Corporation bought the hotel in 1954.
The Sheraton chain had, of course, a big name behind it. A lot of improvements were promised to be made, and there were a lot of changes made.
Their renovation included gluing black and white linoleum type squares all over the lobby floor, adding another coat of paint, etc. But Sheraton owned the property until 1979, and in spite of the changes in the appearance, this was a very busy, popular convention hotel during the Sheraton years.
A welcoming committee is on hand to greet Mr. Cole and other Chevrolet executives. Now, the 1958 Best of Best Roundup is officially underway.
In the 50s, the big promotion was our jazz festivals that we had in the late 50s. It brought thousands of people to the French Lick Hotel to see the jazz greats.
And it became so popular that they felt the Valley could not hold it, and it actually is what developed into the Newport Jazz Festival.
After Sheraton sold the property in '79, we went through a steady decline. We went through several ownership changes, and things just did not seem to improve.
It became kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in as much as the owners of the hotel had great intentions, but not enough money to back up those intentions.
1 mile east at the neighboring West Baden Springs Hotel, the situation had become even more desperate. After years of neglect and a decade of vacancy, the building had begun to collapse. In 1997, Historic Landmarks Foundation of Indiana partnered with the Bloomington-based Cook Group to save and partially restore the renowned dome structure. This act would eventually lead to the restoration of the French Lick Springs Hotel.
We reached a point where we realized the only way you could save one hotel was to save both of them.
Many people in the valley hoped that salvation would arrive in the form of a casino. Indiana had legalized gambling in the mid-1990s and had issued the state's 11th and last casino license to a group at Patoka Lake, located about 10 miles south of French Lick. Because of Army Corps of Engineers restrictions, it seemed unlikely that the license would ever be used there.
Gambling returned to the valley due to the grassroots efforts of the people in Orange County. There were a number of dedicated citizens who became known as the Orange Shirts for Orange County, and they would don their orange t-shirts and visit Indianapolis on a regular basis.
This group of citizens really pushed the state legislature, and with the help of Representative Dembo from the area, were able to persuade the legislature to grant them that 11th casino license for the area here.
When you think about the history of the valley and the fact that they have a heritage in gambling, this should have been the first place, not the last place, that gambling returned to Indiana when the legislature legalized it in the mid-1990s.
The Indiana Gaming Commission accepted proposals for construction of a casino in the valley. After an aborted start with Donald Trump's organization, in 2005 the commission awarded the gaming license to Blue Sky, a partnership between Indianapolis-based real estate developer Louth Group and a foundation created by the Cook Group. The restoration and casino project moved forward.
If we put this hotel back to the way it was in 1901 or 1902, nobody'd want to stay here. But what we do restore is the interior decorations. We make these buildings in the public areas look as they did at the time that they were in their prime. This hotel was built over a period of about 25 to 30 years. So as you move through the hotel, we've restored it somewhat to the era of each wing.
The state of the hotel when restoration began was pretty bad.
The hotel over the years had a lot of things added to it that shouldn't have been added. In the area that was the original ball and dining room behind the front of the hotel, over the years they chopped that up, they tore things down, they added things, they rearranged the kitchens until when we got here you couldn't even tell what was originally there.
Their condition structurally was beyond the point of no return when it comes to putting in dollars for what you'd get out of the structure. They were mostly from the 1950s and 1960s. They had very little significance as historic properties.
And there really was no practical way to remodel it into anything that was usable.
Part of the demolition effort, there was a smokestack that really wasn't used anymore since the coal-fired boilers were gone and natural gas boilers were in use. But it was about 120 feet tall. It was pretty much an icon in the valley, but it had structurally been lowered by about 40 feet in prior years. Sometime in the 1950s it had been capped off, and all the brick had been just tumbled inside the existing chimney.
People like to stay in hotels that don't fall down. So the first thing we've had to do in both hotels is repair them structurally.
Once we started to uncover, remove carpet, remove vinyl wall covering, strip down paint, it's when we found some of the very bad things like plaster that had totally deteriorated and structural problems with the hotel. Probably the largest challenge that we've had to encounter is structural stability, especially in the oldest part of the main front wing section of the building, because it's wood frame, it's on load-bearing masonry, and it has been remodeled at least 4 times prior to us.
They built the front wing of the hotel as a 5-story building with a lobby that had a mezzanine without columns under it. And then they decided to make it a 6-story hotel. And I think things started to sag and kind of give.
The lobby, second floor, is a big open mezzanine. And the way they solved the problem back in 1905 was to go up on the 3rd floor and build heavy timber trusses, which are 14-inch square timbers, and they're built like a bridge truss. And these trusses began to just deflect in the middle, and not a minor deflection. They deflected 7 inches at the worst point. So rather than try and jack the building up and run the risk of doing damage to floors 4, 5, and 6, we elected to structurally stabilize the trusses with steel plate right where they are, and then we went in and leveled up the corridor floors. The most striking architectural features of this hotel would be the lobby. All of the lobby is original to the hotel, including the floor, the walls, the ceiling, all the columns, all the gilding.
We brought in Conrad Schmidt to look at the lobby, and initially we just told them, do a little test section in the lobby, let's see what it looks like, and that's when they found the Scagliola, an old style faux marble. No one knew that that was there. So when we found it, we knew we had to restore it.
Scagliola, sometimes called Scagliola, actually is defined as paint in the plaster. It's a process that very few people in the United States even know how to reduplicate or construct. Conrad Schmidt Studios has a very fine gentleman named Denny that knows how to do it. He's probably one of 6 that are in captivity, and we've got him captive here.
My particular job is to make sure that all the restoration of the Scagliola is complete from beginning to end, and we found that the Scagliola is in fairly good shape. It's been protected over the years by what they've done is they've painted over the Scagliola probably 30 years ago. There's probably 6, 7 layers of paint on it, and actually that Scagliola was somewhat protected by the paint. And so we stripped all the columns, restored the columns, and they realized, you know, we've got something really unique here. The Scagliola itself is made up of pigmented plaster. It was developed over probably 400 or 500 years ago in Europe.
It goes through a 7-step polishing process where it's sanded down and it actually has the consistency of glass when you're done.
Gonna have Popeye arms at the end of this job.
The last polishing operation is done with a material called aluminum oxide. It's a very, very fine grit.
Scagliola means splinters of light, which once the scag is shined and polished to a high gloss, it just reflects light, a lot of light. It's durable, it's repairable.
So, you know, we're hoping that under, you know, the conditions that we've created in the buildings now with climate control, et cetera, they'll last probably, hopefully indefinitely.
Right over my shoulder, there's a whole lot of rosettes in this high bay. There's actually 161. And we knew that there was a light bulb in every one of them because you could see them. So sitting there one day when the hotel was still open, I counted, well, we need 161 new light bulbs, and we need to find out where the switches are. And then as we start to go through the lobby, between every one of these brackets, we have a rosette and a light in this bay. Down below, we have the same number of brackets, only 4-fold. And in between each one of those, we pull off a piece of duct tape that had been painted for probably 50 years, and here's a light fixture. So we're going to restore 161. That would be beautiful. Now we found 859 more of them.
They set up a plaster shop here on site and actually have restored all of those little rosettes, and they are lit again today and provide a nice glow.
What we do is we pour the rosette with the ceramic piece in it so that they stay in good and secure. And then they just fit up to the ceiling. They screw a hole in here and fasten them in, and they hang off the top of it. We spray our molds so that they will release from the mold itself. We kind of get a little bit in here and then take us a brush and kind of stomp it down in there, spread it out so that it fills all the voids. We just kind of fill it up, get it full, stomp it down in there and mash it. Then you take this little squeegee and just slide it over there. We're recreating some of the old part of the hotel, so we're making this piece. This is the one we start everything on. This string right here, we put in just to give our piece a little more strength. He lays his mud out there, and then I take this jig right here. We just get it started. Well, we've got 300 lineal feet of this to make.
Well, when we initially started restoration of the hotel, it was still a functioning hotel. Our plan was to close down a wing at a time and go through it and restore it.
But when we realized the issues that the French Lick Hotel had and the fact that we really couldn't continue to allow guests to stay in it for safety reasons, then we decided to close the hotel in November of 2005 and reopened it the following November of 2006 when the casino opened. And so that gave us really a year to renovate the entire hotel.
We had to bring in 450,000 cubic yards of fill to get up out of the floodplain before we could ever even start construction. So we brought in about 9 feet of fill. Then we had to dig through 9 feet plus the soils that were underlying to get to the foundation levels.
The colonnade room was turned into a cafeteria because of programming and functionality. It seems like the right place, the right size. The reason why it wasn't maintained as a conference space is because it's too small to accommodate today's needs. It's very historic and characteristic, but it's probably not quite wide enough for a huge conference.
When the decision was made that we were going to have to build a new convention and event center in order to be able to host meetings here, we decided we didn't need that as a ballroom, especially given the fact that we needed a place for a large buffet, because when you have a casino, you've got to have a big buffet.
The decoration of the colonnade is going to be very similar to the lobby in terms of the painting. The moldings of the plaster will have some gilding, but not to the extent that the lobby does. It's a much taller space, so the detail doesn't need to be as refined.
It has a little bit more of a blue palette as opposed to the more richer and warmer red palette of this. It's balancing the building.
The hotel chandeliers that are in the Colonnade Ballroom were originally in the old ballroom of the hotel, which was demolished. The chandelier restoration was replace the beads and then replate them to bring back the original silver finish that they had. The veranda of the hotel didn't need too much work. There was a little bit of repair along the edge under the banister. It needed painting, of course, but for the most part we just had to kind of clean it up and polish it up, and it was good to go.
There was a lot of excitement here one day when our construction workers discovered an old safe.
We were working on the hallway near where the old Derby bar was in the hotel, and there was a bad area of plaster, and a foreman told some guys, get this plaster off this wall because we're not going to be able to build over it this way. And they knocked the plaster off and discovered that there was a safe door behind it. So we brought in a safe expert to crack it, and he had a very difficult time with that safe.
Hear that click?
Yeah.
That's what's throwing me off. Yeah. See, I got them all in line. Yeah.
The obvious thing whenever you find a safe that you don't expect is we ought to call in Geraldo Rivera. You know, maybe Al Capone is in there. But there was a lot of speculation, of course, about what was in there. People were thinking, oh, there might be old money, there might be old records, there might be, somebody said maybe there's a bunch of gold in there, of course, buried treasure, the whole bit.
I think you probably voided the warranty by now.
Hey, we got a key in this one. Oh, great. How about that? It's empty.
There was nothing in it. One interesting thing to me was there were two light bulbs. One was in the light fixture, one was on a shelf. The bulb on the shelf dated from about 1914, 13, something like that. The bulb in the socket probably dated from 1940 to 45. But that was all that was in the safe.
Wrigley Spearmint Gum, the flavor last.
Oh, there it is. Oh, they found some spearmint gum.
It's a brick safe, so we'll probably move the door frame to a different place. This is where hallway needs to be. The blasting that's being carried on inside the building is removal of rock so that we can get in sanitary sewer lines. We've got about 400 lineal feet of blasting to do, about 3 feet wide and about 3 feet deep. The process we're using is to saw the floor, cut the trench, remove the old concrete slab, and then we've hired a blasting company out of Bloomington to come in and pre-drill small charges. They lay a very heavy mat over top of the blast site, evacuate everybody out. And then we go back in and dig out the rock and continue laying pipe.
There also is a bellman's building at the front of the hotel. We had to raise that building a little bit because as part of the flight control and the rebuilding of the road, we had to regrade the front of the hotel.
Well, what we did, it's called a banding procedure. What we do, we drill holes under between the foundation and the brick, about every 6 inches. And then we run bands through, and the bands wrap up around our steel network. Once it was up, we raised it about 5 feet, and then we put 12-inch iron, 4 of them, across from the old site to the new site. And then we used skates. We set the building on skates, and then we skated it across. We pulled it with our bobcat.
So the bellman's building was actually jacked up, moved 16 feet further to the southeast, and set on a new foundation. If you didn't know the old position and didn't know how we did it, you'd think that the bellman's building was always there. The bellman's building was a deal breaker. This project is in line for $25 million worth of historic tax credits, and the National Park Service has governing control over those tax credits. If we didn't replace it, didn't restore it, then all of those tax credits could go away.
I don't know exactly how many hotel rooms the French Lick Hotel had originally when all the wings were built. When we started work, it had 471 rooms. So when we refurbished the hotel, we dropped that room count. In the north wing of the hotel, we essentially completely reconfigured all the rooms. In the rest of the hotel, the room layouts are pretty much exactly as they were. And the French Lick Hotel now has 442 rooms. We had to replace all the windows. The windows in the hotel have been replaced with aluminum sash in the existing original wood framing. And as a result, all the windows were rotted out and unusable. So all the guest room windows are new in the French Lick Hotel. Most of the first floor windows around the lobby and so on, we rebuilt, and they're either historically correct or original.
The Pluto Pavilion, that's a very elaborate building on the north face of the main wing. At one time, before the north wing was actually constructed, that was the main entrance to the hotel.
On the roof, we put gold leaf on it, so from the outside it looks a little bit like the Lost Ark of the Covenant. It was where they used to serve the sulfur water, back when people drank the sulfur water. And it was a very elaborate, decorative room.
In that particular room, we're going to use a new aluminum leaf gilding method.
It used to be called the Pluto Pavilion, but because of the silver finish that it has, it's called the Silver Room.
That room will come right back to its original grandeur and elegance. On the north side of the hotel, there was an acrylic domed pool.
They put this fiberglass aluminum dome right in front of the Pluto Pavilion.
Upon all kinds of structural investigation, we had found that all of the steel ribs that went up and made the dome were contaminated with the sulfur dioxides that are in the air, and it had corroded all of the steel to where it would have to be totally replaced. So we elected to destroy the swimming pools and flip them over on the other side to where they're on the south side and you have the good exposures, and create another pool that's indoor-outdoor. When we come out of the center of the octagon now, we're going to hit the center of the pool face.
Yes.
Good. 8.5?
8.5 inches is what it took.
It'd be larger than the other one, capable of holding 125 people, and have a center fountain in the middle.
The hotel has always had a spa.
The changes that we made in the spa were pretty extensive. There are some rooms at the front part of the spa building that had a lot of elaborate finishes, and we restored those. The rest of the spa, we had to completely relay it out. We started over. There were skylights in the spa, but we took the remaining skylight panels and we had additional pieces as needed fabricated to match, and then we put the skylight back in what is now the fitness area. People expect to have privacy. People expect to be in a quiet, somewhat darker room that's completely private. But when you come to the spa, you can still take a Pluto bath in an old-style tub, just as you've always been able to do here.
The octagon is original to the building, and what's going to happen with it, it's going to be refaced. It's about 1,200 square feet up there, stained glass, really a beautiful space.
On the lower level of this octagon, we have what we are calling spring number 8, and it's intended as the bar and snack bar for the swimming pool. And then above that, in an octagonal room that was above that, we put a very nice, it's the top of the line suite in the hotel.
The Donald Ross is being completely restored back to what it was in the 1920s, prior to when Walter Hagen won the PGA.
Well, this course is unique to start with. I mean, this is a rolling piece of property that you don't find everywhere else. Mr. Ross built on all different types of terrain. Here, there's about as much movement in the land as you can stand, and still have a decent golf course to play on.
I think the goal with the restoration here is to bring this golf course back as close to the original as possible, to give it that historic feel and look of a truly classic golf course. When you talk about Donald Ross golf courses, of course you talk about the greens complexes, the Redan type greens or the built up elevated greens.
They're more squarish in shape than one is used to on golf courses of today. Over the years, the greens at French Lick, like they do at many other golf courses, become circular because of the mowing patterns they use in mowing the green.
A lot of the green shapes were kind of rounded off. If you look at Donald Ross's plans, they were more square corner type greens. And so we've gone in and put these square corners back in the greens.
This green in 1999 was about half the size of what it is today. These are the original dimensions of the green as per the plans that are in the basement of the clubhouse.
The biggest element, I think, is the reconstruction of all the bunkers. Over time, we had lost about 30 to 35 of those bunkers. They've all been placed back into the design, back into the golf course, and we were able to do that because we had an original plan or original routing plan of the golf course, as well as hole-by-hole drawings from Donald Ross himself.
We may add a bunker back in, and he said, well, did it really go here? We dig down, we find old sand, we find old cinders that they use kind of in some of the drainage before. So I think it kind of reinforces that we're doing the right thing.
These bunkers are truly hazards. The lips of the bunkers are 4 and 5 feet higher than the golfer standing in the bottom of them, and they cause a great deal more difficulty, as we can see with Mayer here, who apparently is reaching for China with his sandwich. There we go.
We've lengthened some of the holes to offset today's equipment. As you know, the golf ball goes farther, the clubs hit it farther, so we've created a set of tees that will allow a challenge to the player who hits at a far distance.
Concrete paths have been put in, curbing has been put in certain places to help keep carts on the path, to help maintain the turf in those areas.
This was not just a restoration, but a rebuilding, in that the irrigation system had to be totally replaced.
It's all computerized, automated, where it almost tells the superintendent by evapotranspiration and by weather documentation the amount of water to put down.
I think it'll be one of the best classical designs in the Midwest.
In all the golfing circles, people are going to know about the Donald Ross course at French Lick.
The hotel, when we got here, simply didn't have the type of meeting space that people needed. So we knew if we were going to rebuild the convention business down here, we had to have a modern meeting facility. And the types of meetings that people have tend to require more space. You have to be able to make the rooms dark if you're going to use a projector. You've got to have it equipped with computer hookups. There were other things that we needed to modernize the hotel that also went into that building. And so that building serves a lot of needs that we had to make the hotel function as a modern hotel behind the scenes.
The casino is built to resemble a paddle wheel, side wheeler, riverboat complete with smokestacks and a wheelhouse. It does not float. It will never float. It's sitting on 8-foot diameter caissons that are drilled some 20 feet into rock. But it does resemble the largest side wheeler ever built by humankind.
The reason the casino looks like a boat is because the legislature said that gambling in Indiana has to be on boats. Now, it does not have to float. It just has to be in a nautical themed vessel, that's the term they use, on a water feature. It was considered something of a victory that it didn't have to float. Because if it had to float, we would have had to use naval architects, we might have had to have Coast Guard certification, we might have had a Coast Guard crew for something that's floating in a pond.
It's abiding by the letter of the law to have it look like a boat, because that's what the legislation says. And yeah, most people do think it's kind of silly, but it is nonetheless a functioning casino.
The result of the restoration of the hotel has exceeded everybody's expectations.
The structure itself has a very rich history, and it is, a study of architecture and the flamboyance that was the early 1900s.
The way it's turned out has really exceeded my expectations, because when we started, we didn't necessarily know what we'd find or what it would look like when we were done. We had a rough idea.
We knew it would be done in a wonderful way, it would be done right, but I don't think we could comprehend the extent of the improvements.
It is very significant. It's one of those irreplaceable landmarks that we should all enjoy today.